I don't see Peter Kahn, so William, are you here in his stead?
Can't hear him.
Yeah, you're muted.
He's muted. There we go.
Peter's about 10 minutes late. He'll be here.
Oh, he'll be here. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. Well, when Peter gets here, we'll have a full house. And in the meantime, we still have William here sitting in for him. So I think we are good to go. So this is the 7th meeting of the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Working Group. And at our new and improved time from 6 to 9. So tonight we are going to talk about a framework for analyzing the policy levers, and we're going to do that by also digging in and starting to talk about a couple of the ideas. It looks like we surveyed on one idea and we put a different one on the agenda, so ooh, that's too bad. But we will get to the natural persons. We'll start with natural persons policy, and then I think we did 1 week minimums as the second one we asked people about. And you know, that is meant to serve two purposes. One is to actually deep dive and start to talk about this, and the other is to sort of test this particular framework for analysis. And then the other thing we want to do tonight is talk about the updated town meeting schedule. I think that went out to everybody, the special town meeting schedule that the town developed, but also to give you an update on the data schedule, and to talk a little bit about it's basically a choice for the group and some implications on our timeline of that choice. So we will get to that. And of course, we will take public comment before we close, and try to close by 9 o'clock because I will be hungry and others might be as well. So any questions about our agenda today? And just to name, we have John Delano joining as a speaking member tonight because John Kitchener is out of the country and was not going to be able to participate through the thin walls at 2 in the morning. I think he's in Austria or something. So welcome, John Delano. John for John swap.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and extra points for doing this with, I'm sure you're in a deep state of jet lag. So
I am.
thank you. Thank you
About
for
36 hours without sleep. I can't sleep on those airplanes, I'll tell you.
well, you know, it's gonna make this conversation all the more fun for you. Okay, so first we want to approve our meeting summary from our January 31st meeting. Everybody got that summary. I think we did get a few comments that Semanish, nothing, I think that's substantive. Is everyone comfortable with that meeting summary? Anyone want to?
Stacy, I'll make the motion to approve the January 31st meeting summary.
Thanks, Tom.
Second.
Great. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, great. Meeting summary approved. So let's move right into the policy levers discussion. I think what I'm going to propose is that we start by talking about well, let's, Semanish, if you want to just pull up this presentation, or would you like me to if you're taking notes?
Yeah, that'd be better, but I'm happy to do it.
No, I could do it. See, put it in slideshow. Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen? Great. All right. So the questions we proposed for analysis were first to identify what is the problem we are solving with this policy lever or with this policy tool. So, you know, in answer to the many times we heard from the public and from members of this group, if we're going to propose things, we should know what we're trying to solve. So we thought that would be helpful, starting with a problem statement, then to talk about what data we might have that supports this. That is sort of why do we think that this lever is going to be helpful in solving this problem, since we don't really have the data yet. In this case, it was more what data do we need? Third, to look at what are the expected impacts, both intended and unintended consequences that we think might occur from this. Fourth, how this meets our policy goals, and why. And then lastly, any questions or other next steps that we think would be important to attend to. So we can come back to sort of whether we like these questions or not, but let's do it in the context of diving into the discussion. Now, I want to just apologize up front. Our intention was to actually synthesize your what came out of the survey prior to this meeting, and we ran out of time. That did not happen. So again, as we sort of mentioned, it's tough to turn these things around really fast. You know, people were still filling this out beginning of the week, and so we today did not quite manage to get this done. So this is more or less rough. I took a few out that were repeat, but this is basically, in the future, what we could do is try to do some synthesis in advance from what we hear. But for this one, just to try and summarize, basically we heard here that the problem that we would be trying to solve with the natural persons, some kind of natural persons regulation that is trying to limit ownership or STR use to people who were natural persons that are not corporate entities. You might have an LLC as long as it's connected to natural persons. The problem people wanted to solve really had to do with keeping corporations out of residential areas. Some people noted that this could reduce the appeal for corporations of buying up homes that might otherwise be available to real people to live in. And it might actually lead to more, more family potential for families to own these properties. And then a couple people mentioned that by eliminating people who had no personal connection or were trying to just maximize profit, or at least limiting that, you might get better neighbor behavior. People who were felt more connected to their neighborhoods, you might get less complaints. So those were some of the reasons we saw here. Peter.
And just a question. I mean, we're making an assumption that there's a problem here. Again, I don't remember us discussing that corporate ownership was a problem. I understand that it was things that people were uncomfortable with. But are we making an assumption that corporate ownership is a problem? Are we making an assumption that by not having corporate ownership, we're going to have affordable housing? I'm confused what you just said. That's all.
Yeah. So the question I asked in the survey was, what problem would we be trying to solve if we were to do this policy? And Peter, if you look here, there are people in the group who said, we think that corporate incursion, if it is taking homes that might otherwise be used for, families, we heard people saying here, right, that it might be a problem because you don't have someone on island to resolve noise complaints or other bad behaviors, right? So this is exactly the answer. It's not an assumption that it's a problem. It's your collective answers to the question of what problem would this solve. Now, some of them are not answers to that question, right? The saying restrict corporate ownership is not a problem statement. So not everybody answered the question in exactly that way. But that was the intent. And if you read these, you will see that some people are positing problems that they think that that corporate ownership contribute to.
Yeah, so if one person decided that that was a problem, it ended up on this list. Doesn't necessarily mean any more than one person was interested.
No, we had a meeting. The reason this policy lever is being examined is because it came up in all the groups at our discussions back in December. People thought, hey, this is a policy lever worth looking into. And in order to look into it, this is how we are subjecting it to scrutiny. Right? And so this is the reason why this is.
And that's fine. I mean, I'm just still confused about what the problem is. So that's what makes make it harder for me to understand this.
Yeah.
But
So
go
that's
ahead.
right. And that's what we're trying to discuss right here. And I think, Peter, what you are trying to say, if I'm right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like what you're saying is you don't think there's a problem with corporate ownership of STRs.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just
You're not
saying,
saying that.
I'm just saying that if a couple of people in our public discussion brought that up, doesn't mean it's necessarily a problem.
Right.
And I think that some of the things, for example, nobody on the island has already been solved in the new restrictions that we have on rentals. So I just don't want us wasting time doing something that's already been done. That's all.
Yeah. So I just want to be clear that the goal of this conversation right now is to talk about what is the problem that this would solve. Right. So what I want to hear from people is, what is the problem you think this would solve? This is what you answered in the survey. What else do you want to say about it? We're hearing from Peter that he's still skeptical that there's a problem that this solves. Julia? Julia, yeah.
Sorry, so I would say there's no doubt that I think a lot of folks in the community agree that corporate intrusion is a problem. It's not just a few people who believe that. To give an example, the company Heirloom that was featured in the Inquirer and Mirror, I think over the summer, they purchased a house at 26 Mayflower, which is a really year-round neighborhood. They tried to buy 13 Bartlett Road, which is a super year-round neighborhood. They bought a house on Beaver Street. There's no majority of STRs. This is a small percentage of STRs. I think I've heard from, let's say, Nantucket Together that maybe they thought it was like 5% of STRs could be corporate. Let's just assume, something around there, even though, maybe a little bit higher, but this problem is not going to stop. And so I feel like there's no doubt that's an issue. My concern with this policy lever is that a natural person can act in a very similar way when we're talking about, I think what we're talking about generally is zoning here in terms of using a property. So
can you hold your concern about I just want to, for a minute, I want to just focus on the problem question, if that's okay.
So the problem question is, I don't believe that you're solving much in terms of changing the landscape as we go forward. So you may stop corporations today, but if what you're trying to do is preserve, like, I'm not sure what we're trying to do here with this problem, but let's assume you're trying to preserve neighborhoods, preserve homes, preserve quality of life. I'm not sure what we're trying to achieve here, but I think you're only delaying the inevitable if you're allowing, if you're only restricting corporate ownership, but you're allowing, let's say, 2 investors, 3 investors to act like a corporation, but not look like one.
Okay. Jim,
Thanks. I think that, in my opinion, this is a small problem now because as far as we know anyway, there are not that many corporate ownership examples on Nantucket, but we know there are some, and some of them we've heard about problems with. But I feel like the problem here is a potential future problem that could be maybe disastrous if corporations are allowed to come in, buy properties, and rent them out as STRs. As you all will read in the article about Austin, a corporation called Urban Stay has purchased 11,000 homes in Austin and is using them as STRs. Whole neighborhoods have been decimated and torn apart by this. They also do very short-term rentals, two days or so, and that encourages party behavior. So what I think the problem that this solves is, one, preserve the quality of neighborhoods by not letting corporations come in, and two, encourage better behavior. And possibly it will help with more housing, probably not that much. I mean, there's so many economic forces that are at play on Nantucket. But I think the problem is real, even if it doesn't exist in a large amount, in a large quantity at this point. And that's why I think this is a good lever for that. We can talk about that later, why I think it actually will be effective, but that's the problem I see.
yeah, thanks. John,
Try to unmute. Am I unmuted yet?
you are unmuted.
I am unmuted. Okay, thank you.
Job.
I think what Jim points out is absolutely correct, and that is that this is an issue that is not perhaps as big a problem today as it might be tomorrow. To me, when I first saw this, what was compelling, well, first of all, I think it's very important to define what you mean by a business entity. And you included a business definition in there that I think is key. Julia, I think, wants to expand beyond that definition to include individuals. The other aspect that occurred to me, though, are we talking about all business entities everywhere or off-island business entities? That is to say, would somebody who, if the concern is that somebody who is in a business operation doesn't care about Nantucket, doesn't care about neighbors, doesn't care about the community because they're never here, that's an off-island business entity, as opposed to one on the island that may have just as real interests as any residential owner might have. So I think the definition becomes really important. But just as important is the data. And that's where I think Peter's comment makes a whole lot of sense, in that, is this a problem? Do we know that it's a problem? We tend to all agree, and I'm certainly one of those that, I tend to think that off-island commercial interests are of no value on Nantucket. But have they caused harm? I don't know. And that's where the data and the analytics of the data become really, really important. Just my thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks, John. David.
Yeah, I just, I completely understand where Peter was coming from on this, but I think the magic of this is in the exercise, in all honesty, is us engaging in each problem that you give us and thinking it through. And maybe in the end, when we get data, this won't necessarily be something on our radar, but I still think that we need to get our head in the space of what the lever does, what's the outcome we're looking for, and why we're doing it. When it comes to corporate owned, I think it is the devil that everyone hates, whether it exists in a large percentage or not, which I don't think it does. I think that it's the thing that everyone hates. And I think that even if we only have 1, 2, 3, 4% of them as owners currently, we still need to put up some guardrails so that it doesn't become a bigger issue in the future. And I agree with what everyone said about neighborhoods and corporate ownership. I just think that this is part of the exercise we need to be in. When we get the data, our brains will already be working in a fashion that will serve us best. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Kathy.
Thanks. So just to clarify, that 5% number that Nantucket Together said came from the town in one of their presentations. So that's where it's not my number, that's where it came from. And I think that there's two different things here. I think that Jim hit on it and other people have said that that we don't have any data. The only data we have is what the town said they thought. So I don't think that the commercial only enterprises are a large percentage. I think what we heard in the input from all the people that spoke in the public input meeting was the fear of that, more than anything else, the fear of that taking over. It may or may not happen, but I think as what David said, some guardrails. So maybe if we don't want that to be here, that may be the situation, that may be the problem that we're solving. So this one may not have any data right now that shows it's a problem, but it's something that the town and what people seem to feel they don't want. So I think the process of looking at it and talking about it like we're doing is the way to go, because we can decide, well, what problem is that are we solving if we do this, and then what are the implications of it downstream. So I like the dialogue, and I think that it just seemed like this was the one that jumped out from all of the input we got. Understanding wasn't representative necessarily of the voting public.
Yeah, thanks. Karen.
I was just gonna say, I think that the whole exercise was, like David said, like just kind of really made you think about all of these things in a lot of detail. And so I know that there are more questions about this one thing, and I'm wondering if maybe we should like sort of just look at all of it before we start kind of getting into the weeds about it, because I think it'll be interesting to see what other people came up with when they did that kind of thought process. And then we can, like evaluate whether this works for doing this with each of the levers as we go forward in different ways.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I've been slow to move on, partly because I recognize that it gets even messier from here, because at least I did a tiny bit of editing on this slide, and I did a little editing on this one too. Good. Okay, the next one gets messy. Okay, so the next question, and maybe Karen, with your suggestion, I was thinking the same thing. Let me kind of just walk through all of these, and then we can just open up to, I don't know, to talk about this policy lever. So when we ask people about data, obviously in this case, right, we don't really have data yet, but people are saying, well, here's what we would need. We would want to know how many housing units have been purchased or are owned. What relationship do we know, if there's any relationship between bad behavior? How many properties are there, right? It's sort of someone else asked known workarounds, right? Because that's another, I don't know if that's exactly data, but what we might know from how well this works from other municipalities or case studies. And people wanted to know how many would be affected or wouldn't be affected, who use it for longer. So corporate ownership for longer term vacation rentals and what that might be. So this was the data that people suggested would be helpful. All right, expected impacts. Sorry, I have not had a chance to sort through these yet, but the answer to this question is meant to be, what do we think we will achieve by doing this, right? So preserving housing for natural persons, trying to protect the character of neighborhoods, eliminating purely commercial use, increase or less decrease of available housing for year-round residents, prevent investment businesses and business entities from gobbling up properties, eliminate one line of competition for property. Maybe this would affect prices. It would maybe affect people, when we don't have people who are good neighbors or stewards, reduce complaints, increase responsiveness. Some people think that it would only mean that it would change to a vacation rental of 31 plus days. So the only impact would be fewer turnovers, or it would be sold and a new, maybe it would be an owner who doesn't rent, or maybe it would be an owner who is a real person and would continue with STRs. And then keep intact the character of traditional workforce, increase supply. So similar things here. And hold people responsible for behavior on the property because you have owners there. Julia?
Thanks, Stacey. I guess I'm sort of confused as I saw we've identified, I think we seem to generally agree that this is a small portion of the overall STR market. I'll assume that one.
Yeah.
That are owned by corporations, right? We don't have data, but we know it's out there. And we have good examples. I think enough examples to know it's out there. I'm confused as to how eliminating that small portion or changing their business model, right? Could be going to longer, not short-term rental. Obviously, they could do whatever they want. They could probably sell at a profit. How would that make any dent in, or make a significant dent, let's say, in preventing homes from being used only as STRs? Because, if you look at that Wall Street Journal article where Mr. Mom announces to the world in November and then again in January that he's purchasing a portfolio of homes, and he's an individual, and he's purchasing a portfolio of homes at really high prices, which is just astonishing, that the STRs, that he's turning them into STRs and they're paying for themselves. And instead of investing in stocks, this is what he's doing. That's the type of use. So nobody ever lives there. He's in a purely residential neighborhood. And that's the part of I'm seeing in sort of like how attack, sort of looking only at this corporate segment might help eliminate commercial STRs. And I don't see how there's a relationship there. I don't see how, if you don't, the financial proposition to operate a strictly commercial STR, nobody lives there, is so enticing to a lot of people who don't, have no ties here, may have ties here, but frankly, a lot who don't. And so we're going to continue to see this trend and have pressure on the year-round home, inventory of homes. So I'm sort of seeing the outcome looks maybe, I guess, more favorable on this page than I would assume it would actually be in practice.
Yeah. Kathy.
Okay, so I think that, yes, we all agree that it's not going to be a big impact, but so the assumption that this is a bad idea or something we shouldn't do assumes that we need to have a big impact. We need to really reduce the number of STRs, and that's really a problem. And one of the things I did not see in the public input was that kind of sentiment that it seemed like most people were saying, we know we need them, they're the engine of the economy. That's where people stay. We don't want to really impact them in a major way, because then we've got no tourist industry. So I was seeing that a lot in there. So I think that a small lever might be something that people wanted. And also, so we can't assume that that's what's going on. And then I know that I think David Mom has bought 2 properties so far. I don't know how many more he has planned. One of them is a cottage on Old North Wharf, which isn't a year-round home for anybody anyway. You can't live on those piers, especially in the wintertime. So it's just, I think let's look at this in terms of what it does and what it doesn't do, and not at, a larger picture. This is, we're getting down into little levers. So that's my thought there.
Yeah, thanks. And just to name, right, like we can talk about these ideas one at a time, and just because we support, if the group says, oh, we like this idea, but we need a lot more things as well, right? This isn't a pick one exercise, right? But I do want to say, I think what Julia was saying is, to the extent the problem is that people want homes that aren't being used solely as profit generating entities with no connection, that individuals, just saying corporations can't do it and making it natural persons. Her concern is that this does not do that, right? Not that we need to get rid of the number of STRs, Kathy. She wasn't making that argument. She might at a later time, but this case, she was just making the argument about the homes that are used solely as STRs by people who aren't connected.
Yeah, I understand that. And there's a lot of, but that's the hard part, is the connected to Nantucket. How do you legislate that?
Exactly.
That's the hard part. And there's a lot of people on the island who are year-round people who own multiple properties, and that is their 401k. So, that's the issue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stacy, for clarifying that, because I think that's what I was trying to say is, oftentimes, you might assume, oh, if this is the problem and we solve it, then we get to where we want to go. Great. But if what we're trying to solve is slightly different, that's what I was trying to point, is maybe you need to look at a different solution. That's all.
Yeah. And I think it's the problem that I'm hearing. If that's the problem you're trying to solve, it's not that it's different, it's bigger, right? Peter.
Just a couple things. I think number one is there anything wrong with buying a house with plans on retiring to their house? Now, I bought my house and I retired to it, although I've never rented my house. We used it in the summer and my family was here all summer. Many people can't afford to do that. But I think if somebody buys the house here, rents it out for 2 weeks a year, and then, keeps it for 2 weeks a year for their family, rents it out the rest of the time so they can afford to have it, with plans on retiring into it, it is what it is. I think Kathy probably summed it up the best way when she said it's a 401k. When I look at investments for myself, I look at things that I can make the most money on. And if I can make the most money on buying a house, and I'll be honest, I own no other houses here besides the house that I live in. But if I was looking to make an investment, it certainly wouldn't be a bad investment. So I think that you can't. I guess the other thing is that as we lower the amount of houses that are available to rent, the higher the rents are going to be. So we're going to have even a more exclusive neighborhood than we had before. That's it.
Okay. Jim, and I'm gonna, while you speak, Jim, if you don't mind, I'm gonna just go to the next slide, which is the unintended consequences. But go ahead and make your comment, and then I'll.
Okay, so 2 quick points. One, it is probably a small problem now, corporate ownership of STRs, but it could become major. And so the important thing is, I think it's like a form of insurance. Close the door on that now. Second thing, I like Julia's point. And I think her concern, to the extent we can agree to it, is to use a different policy lever. For instance, only one STR can be owned by a natural person. In other words, natural person cannot own more than one. Now, we'd probably grandfather in or whatever pre-existing non-conforming in people who currently own more than one. That's what Palm Springs did. They brought it in, and over time that dissipated, but they only allow one STR per natural person, which I think would stop the solely profit seekers from buying up a number of properties with their vast wealth and renting them out. So I think I think Julia's good concerns have to be addressed by other policy levers, but this one could be very important, whether it's a small corner that it helps with or whether it prevents a massive problem later. That's it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. And yeah, I think it's totally fair to sort of raise, hey, if we pair it with this other thing,
Yeah.
right, and we can come back to that. All right, so looking at unintended consequences, I see a lot of, not a ton of unintended consequences, concerns that business entities may find workarounds. That's definitely a potential one. It may be that there are responsible business entities stewarded by people who care about the island, right? Like I think someone mentioned, what about on-island business entities? There's the work and cost for monitoring and enforcement. Oh, sorry. Went forward. And then, yeah, if you reduce STRs too much, some people said there's income and tourism implications, but as people have said, because it's such a small number, probably pretty limited at this point. Anyone want to say anything further about this? I mean, I would say one of the reasons why this sort of rose to the top, this particular policy lever, is that yes, though the the intended consequences, the impacts may be quite small, as you all have been saying, the unintended consequences also seem to be potentially quite small. So the risk is much lower than, and I think that's something that I think it's really helpful for you all to evaluate as you are looking at policy levers, is the sort of risk reward equation of these things. So Julia.
Yes, maybe the way I would look at this one, and maybe some of the other members may look at it similarly, is that whatever gets decided should include this, because it seems to be something that like almost everyone agrees.
Yeah, great. That's exactly how we're trying to build the package, is to like talk about each thing and be like, should this be part of the package? So that's really helpful. Okay, so this is the rankings on policy goals, again, not presented in a very helpful way. So we can do better. This is how Google spits it out for us. But Semanish put in the chat each of the policy goals. This came out of our initial meetings and conversations. And so you can see on a scale of 1 to 10, where 5 is the highest, people ranked that it was clear and enforceable, got the most 5s. Preserving Nantucket's unique character and traditions, got the second most 5s, and 4s combined, right? And you can sort of see from there sort of what people think, ways people think that this might help meet our goals. John?
Oops. Forgive me if this was covered at the last meeting, which I was not able to be at. But I want to come back to the data that supports a decision one way or the other on any of these policy levers, because it does seem to me that the data is what's critical. We can say we think that it doesn't have a bad consequence, or that it doesn't affect that many people. But where are we with respect to the data that would actually suggest we have X number of commercial, off-island commercial or on-island commercial or whatever? Do we have an answer to that yet, or do we know?
Yeah, so we did spend the last meeting talking about the plan for collecting the data. It is in progress. And the question of corporate ownership, how many STRs are owned by corporate entities or non-natural persons, is one of the questions that the data specialists have been asked to.
That's great. I think that's very important, not just for this issue, but for so many of the others, to know exactly what it is we're solving with actual data and information. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure. Julia?
Yes, I'm curious. So, it seemed that's a lot of work, right? In terms of figuring that out, because let's take, we'll take Copley Group, which is one that we all know about. So that one may actually be a little easier to figure out, but they'll have like an LLC that's a different name. Let's say it's the name of the property. And then the LLC might be attached to individuals. And then you have to know, in essence, you have to kind of know who are the principals of this organization, this corporation, to figure out that they're actually, it's a Copley owned STR. And I've seen that in several cases. And so it's that's a lot of work to look through, all of the LLCs. And I'll be very curious if, how that's done, I guess, but good for them if they're trying.
Yeah. And I know, Jim, you mentioned, that you spoke to someone in Palm Springs and they did not find it that onerous to enforce, but maybe that's where we can pull that person into this, to a panel to share more information about how hard is it to enforce and how much time does it take and all those kinds of questions, because I think that's a good question here. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. I apologize for being a little late, and I apologize as well that this may have been covered before I got on. But to me, this discussion comes full circle back to what is the problem we're really trying to solve, because corporate ownership in and of itself, is that what's causing, are the SDRs that are corporately owned, are they more of a problem than the ones that are individually owned? I mean, because it depends on if it's noise, they may be producing the same amount of noise. If it's, or is the problem instead we want to preserve Nantucket for Nantucketers? Well, then that might be an issue. But to me, I would be very careful about just simply saying, well, we just don't want corporate ownership on Nantucket. That is far too broad a sweep for my liking.
So Peter, because I think maybe you joined after we had the conversation about the problem statement, which is where we started, where we asked people, what is the problem that this would solve? And indeed, people thought that having the neighborhoods for Nantucketers, that piece you mentioned, I think I went back to this problem slide. But I think it was also the big thing people talked about was that even though it's a small problem now, it's closing the door to preventing a large problem in the future, knowing that they've seen that other communities have now been seeing corporations come in and buy houses up by the hundreds or thousands. So that was just to fill you in on what.
But again, I guess so defining the problem is that we're concerned about the buying up of houses, not noise or anything else. In other words,
well, no, some people mention noise and the feeling that bad behavior, again, maybe, they don't know whether data, we probably won't have data to show this one way or the other, but that people who are less concerned about and connected to Nantucket may have a more likelihood to contribute to quality of life. That's a proposition that people are.
That's pretty speculative. I mean, I really think it comes back to defining the problem and what, and the data to tell us what really is a problem. And I'm anxious to see that data. But anyway, that was just my.
Yeah. And the other thing people mentioned, just, I'm not sure exactly when you joined, Peter, was that this idea of corporate ownership, of corporate STR ownership in neighborhoods is something that is very strongly disliked.
I hear you. I hear you. And I don't hold a brief, believe me, I don't hold a brief in these corporations, but I do become concerned that it's, of a patent mentality that corporations are bad in and of themselves. And I'm not sure the data is there. And I think, so I think we just need to be a little careful because, as we know, it's just another form of ownership. Could well be an LLC that doesn't have any connection to Nantucket.
Right. David, sorry, I missed you before because I was looking at faces and not panelists.
No, and I'm sorry my camera's off. I just am having connection issues and no camera smooths that out some. So my statement kind of goes back, I think, to a couple people before. I think unfortunately with money, power, and time, people are going to find workarounds. But we just need to try to reduce the opportunity to do that. So I think with any lever we decide to put in place, I think that we are going to discover that people are going to figure out workarounds. So I think that we need to just march ahead and we can go back and fix those workarounds as they come up. Thanks.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and now that we have just gone through the data on, or the information from the survey on each of the questions, I want to go back and just ask, did we ask the right questions? Did we ask them in the right ways, right? Karen, I know you mentioned in your answer some suggestions about the format of these questions themselves, of this as a tool for analyzing policy ideas. So I want to switch to that for a minute. So just as a reminder, right, we have the problem statement. We ask people, what is the problem you're trying to solve with this policy? What is the data that suggests that this policy will solve that problem? Obviously, once we get the data, or what is the data we would need to show it? What are the expected impacts, both intended and unintended? How does this meet our policy goals? And other questions or next steps. Those are the pieces of the framework that we propose. So I want to just open it up to hear people's thoughts about, is that the right framework? Are we missing things? Should we change the way we ask those? Karen, go ahead.
My main concern was about the way the rankings were, the 1 to 5, because I thought it was really kind of confusing the way it was. How does this meet the policy goal, and what does that mean, meet the whole policy? I just got sort of twisted up thinking about what is it that we're really trying to ask here. And so I wondered about more of what's called a Likert scale, which is sort of, instead of saying, how much do you think this affects at 1 to 5, that you say something more concrete, like, do you think this would have a positive effect on this lever or this goal? And then you would say, something like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree, sort of a 5, or sometimes it's a 7-point scale that way, so that you could kind of, so I thought it was maybe clarifying. You could either do it by clarifying the way it's worded in itself, or maybe change the scale to do, strong impact, classify it more like by how much impact you thought it would have on a particular goal, that kind of thing. So that was one thought. And then I just thought that it would help to maybe also break out the enforceability and what would be involved with some of the logistics of this, and kind of answer some more questions, or ask some more questions about what we thought about that. So how hard is this going to be to implement? Who's going to have to be paid to monitor this, and that kind of thing. So breaking out some more questions about those two areas, I thought might be helpful.
Great, thanks, Karen. Kathy.
So I guess in filling this out, before we have the data, it was difficult because you don't know the answers to the questions. So I think that your comment about we're looking at the lowest risk reward situations and stuff like that, I think that was useful. So I think when you look at the questions and the answers, and you have as many unintended consequences as you have good things come out of it, then I ended up going right down the middle on a lot of them because you don't know which way it's going to go. And until you have the data that sort of says that, it was difficult. So it might be easier once we have data to complete all of these things. And I think Karen has some good ideas as well.
Great. Okay, so yeah, we could definitely do more of a Likert scale for the effects. I would be curious to ask the town, and I don't think we have a town representative here today, about how much they need this group to answer the enforceability logistics questions versus they can answer those for us in some way. Because it does seem like a lot to ask of this group to have the answers to those questions. But that's something I can follow up with the town on. Julia?
I guess my other sort of question is sort of around like, okay, so we're looking at different policy levers, but when we think about what our goals are, I thought that one of the goals was to come up with a zoning article, because that's very clearly defined as a gap in the current zoning code. And I think everyone agrees on that. Maybe I'm wrong. And then if that's the case, then I think I was really interested in the way that Judy Barrett presented it when she did speak to us. So very simply, which is, you sort of have, 3 options in zoning. You allow it, you don't allow it, or you allow it with an accessory use. And there are, it's a spectrum perhaps within that a little bit, but it sort of defines paths. And I was sort of, confused as to how the levers were going to get us to a path where we would answer that zoning question.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that for a second. The goal is not to have a zoning article or to have a general article. The goal is to get agreement on what to do about STRs and then figure out the right vehicle for advancing that solution. I think maybe what you were talking about, Julia, the thing that people support is people do want to see a definition of that makes clear that STRs, at least those that the group wants to be legal, are legal, right? And that Judy's presentation made clear that zoning is probably the best way to do that, so that there is a clear, this group isn't just deciding what you want to make illegal or you want to regulate. You're also actually enshrining potentially the legal uses so that it can reduce legal ambiguity and lawsuits, right?
I think if we didn't come up with a zoning part, we would have failed as a group, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a failure, because that was the intent of town meeting, was that this group would bring us forward a zoning article. That was what the voters were trying to vote on last year. And so, I mean, those were the 2 articles, 42 and 43. They were both zoning articles.
Right.
So I think that, if we don't have that clearly in our that was why the work group was created. That's why we're here. I actually get confused as to why we're looking at the whole issue in terms of trying to solve a bunch of things that I think a lot of people kind of agree. Look, there's going to be a lot of data collection over the next couple of years. And if the regulations need to be altered, I think there's going to be opportunity for that. But this zoning problem that we have, which is, STRs are not legal, is a problem. And so I'm sort of confused as to why we're not narrowing the issue to that, as opposed to looking at it as a much broader, like, we're going to change, the way that we're just going to build a whole policy around STRs.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think, if you look at the description of what this group's job is, it isn't to do a zoning article. That was not the instructions. The instructions were to come up with policies around short-term rentals. So that's not to say there shouldn't be a zoning article, but it's to say that, like, I don't think that's the definition of the task of this group. Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to say, I agree with Julia. There will need to be a zoning component. And I see the zoning component as being very much what you said, Stacy, which is essentially the zoning article will enshrine the right for STRs to take that question away for those groups or in those situations that the regulations allow. And that way, people who are allowed by the regulations are good. The zoning allows it. But the regulations are very careful, very balanced, very intelligent, and sort of to the best good possible for in all the different concerns we have. So I do think we'll need a zoning article, but I think it'll be along those lines.
Yeah, thanks. David.
Thank you, Stacy. Just a couple of things. As what Jim said, can you guys hear me? Because everyone's
We can hear
frozen.
you, yeah.
Hello.
We can hear you. Can you not hear us?
You can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'll keep going then. A couple of things. One, short-term rentals are not illegal in our zoning bylaw. They are not specifically called out as an illegal activity, period, end of discussion. Okay, that is what it is. Okay, right now people have the right to rent unless a court says different. But as Jim said, I think that what we need to be careful is of producing solely zoning articles, because if we try to do that, then every single short-term rental that exists today will be pre-existing non-conforming for eternity, or until they stop that use for whatever the period of time is, 2 years. So zoning is an important piece, but it is definitely not the whole thing, or we're going to end up with a big bag of poop. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Peter.
David really summed it up. I just want all of us to be careful when we're making blanket statements, voicing our opinions that might not necessarily be true. We also have bylaws that we can look at besides just zoning. But I think David covered it pretty well.
Great, thanks. Karen.
Just backtracking on the comment about the logistical, looking at the logistical pieces. I think it would be really helpful to know, how far we have to take it a little bit, but I think we also need to think through how complicated logistically something would be. And I guess that was kind of more my point I don't know if we'll talk about the second one, but when I started thinking logistically about that, it just seemed a lot more complicated. And that's kind of where that thought process came from, that should be part of what we're considering, not that we have to figure out exactly how to implement the.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Peter, did you have something else, or you just didn't put your hand up?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay, so we will go on. We can go on and talk about the next one. I just, before we do that, well, two things. First, I do want to just confirm, though, any other suggestions about the format of the framework? Anything else people think we need to be asking on that? John.
Let me just reiterate, Stacy, what I said earlier about the importance of the definitions.
Yeah.
Because I think in all of these, frankly, in both of these exercises, there's some confusion. And I thought it was very helpful having a definition of business entity in there. There was no definition with respect to whether, as I pointed out earlier, whether this was a Nantucket business versus an off-island, no relation to the island corporate entity. I think you got to build that into it. And for example, on the next one, limit STRs to 1 week minimum so that someone can rent out a maximum of 1 STR per week. I was a little confused as to whether we're saying 1 week is the whole term of the rental period. I know that's not what was intended, because I know that we're talking, we're not trying to keep President Biden from renting for Thanksgiving. He rents for less than a week. Or we're not trying to keep, weddings and the like. At least that's certainly not my intent. But it wasn't clear from this. And so I think in drafting the recommendation, it's really got to be very precise language. And I just want to commend that process. I think that's important.
That's super helpful, John. And I just added that into the description of the recommendation that your people are suggesting. Great. Okay. And so now, before we deep dive into the next one, I do just want to check in with you all, because at our last meeting, a number of you suggested the need to really talk more about these options that had come up. And I just want to check, like, did we just do that? Are we done? Or do people want to say more? Or like, where do you want to go from here with this? Because I think what I've heard is most, but not all of you feel like this could be a useful component of a package of policies. But there, I heard at least one person say, I think it's too broad to attack corporations and single them out. I heard at least one person say, well, I would want to treat on-island and off-island business entities differently. I wouldn't want this to apply to on-island business entities. So I just want to sort of check in, like, can we take this conversation further? Is there anything else to be done here? Or do people feel like, okay, we've done a good job exploring this, let's put it aside? We're certainly not going to try and make decisions about the approaches one at a time, right? And I think to say, okay, this is one a lot of people support, but here's the caveats, and move on and get to the next one, seems to me a useful way to go about this. But I just want to check in how you all feel about that as a matter of process. So David, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to look at the corporate situation. I think that without data, it's difficult. I think that if you stood up at town meeting and asked to see a show of hands of how many people have a problem with corporate owned STRs, you're going to see a lot of hands. So I think that we're going to need to create some guardrails around this. Are we ready to throw down now? I don't think so, but I think that the discussion's good, and I don't think it's wasted. And I think that it's good to do this with each one of these subjects, and then when we get the data, we come back and do it again. It's not easy, it's not fun, but that's going to be, at least in my opinion, the best way to deal with this. So I personally think right now you're doing a great job, Stacy. I think that this is the way that we need to go about doing this, is start picking apart each one of these issues and then move on, and then come back to it when we have data and go at it again. So I'm fine with moving on. I don't think that we're gonna get anywhere with more corporate talk, even though it's justified, and we will. I just don't think right now that until we see the data that we really need to go there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, David. Peter, and just to reiterate, right? My question is on the process. So very helpful to let me know that. Peter.
Yeah, no, if it's on the process, I don't really have a comment. I just think if we go further on this corporate thing, there's got to be a lot of soul searching on what we're talking about. And I'll just throw this one thing out, and I don't know anybody at the Copley Group, but they donated $1 million to the hospital when we built the new hospital. Does that make you a local, or does that make you an off islander? I don't know, but I'm glad we have that $1 million. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Kathy.
This is sort of, I agree with David. We should come back when we have the data, move on. That's fine. And I think what we have to always keep in mind when we're talking about these things, and when we get further along in the process, is part of our charter is our definition of success is something that gets passed at town meeting. So we have to think about what will get that 2/3 vote, for example, if it's a zoning article. And, a lot of people, the other articles that limited STRs that have come before town meeting, like 2 years ago, passed, was defeated overwhelmingly. So there's a lot of sentiment on the island for don't mess with my property rights. I don't care who you are. It's a slippery slope to go down that path. So we have to be aware of that way of thinking as well.
Thanks, Kathy. Peter. Ron.
Yeah, I think Peter just sort of hit it on the head here a little bit. Take the Copley Group. I don't know any details about them, but as my understanding is that the principals are people who own homes on Nantucket and who spend summers there. What's the difference between that and a wealthy individual who owns 5 STRs? I don't see it. So I think we have to be careful. I just underscore what I think hopefully people are thinking is that we really need to be careful in the definitions here and really make them narrow. I don't think this is a big problem. I really, the corporation that is totally unrelated to Nantucket, I don't think, they may, Copley, for all I know, is probably a Delaware corporation. Does that make it, itself a non-Nantucket related entity? No, of course not. Because most corporations are in Delaware for good legal reason. The question is, do the principals have any ties to Nantucket? And I think you got to, so I think I agree. Limiting, creating a definition that is very tight makes sense, but to concede to the people who, and I use this word, I don't mean it in a negative way, but the uneducated. I mean, obviously, we're spending a lot of time. There are a lot of people out there who just think, well, it's corporations got to be bad. It's our obligation to explain to the town meeting what we've gone through, why we're making our recommendations, and we ought to be in a position, it seems to me, to be able to say, hey, if the data is there, the Copley Group is no different than the individual Nantucket person who owns five STRs.
Okay, Jim, we've kind of gotten off process and back into topic, but I think people are raising a couple of good additional points. So that's,
and I'm sure Peter wouldn't call me uneducated because we're both Yale class of 73, Peter. Right. But I do want to say, I think we did have enough discussion on it. I do believe there are many reasons, and Peter missed some of the conversation earlier, I'm sorry about that, but up to limit corporations, including, Peter, you'll read the article from the Texas Monthly that Smanish just sent around that I sent in. Urban Stay has bought up 11,000 homes in Austin. They're renting them out for short periods, 2 or 3 days. It's horrible parties. It's ruined neighborhoods. It's taken away private homes. Now, I'm not saying the Copley Group or whoever would do that, but I think closing that door will prevent that sort of thing. And I think that's the reason why we probably need to discuss it more, but I think that's the reason why we need to have a provision like that.
I don't disagree. Can I just respond to that? I don't disagree necessarily, Jim, but the way to do that is maybe to limit the number of STRs any individual entity, whether it's individual or corporation, but to ban corporations per se because they're the ones who are responsible. Yeah. I don't think.
Well, and I definitely agree with you because that was my answer to Julia's concern earlier, which is to limit. Each natural person can only own 1 STR, as Palm Springs does. But with corporations, there could be other problems which have to do, but I don't know if we want to have this discussion now, but thank you, I agree.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, it keeps raising more, so let's take a few more comments and then see if we can move to the next one. Julia?
I think, I agree with most folks, and it sounds like, this is an item to keep on the list. I agree with Peter, that, Peter Kahn, that there is a really, from my experience, the issue is not necessarily that it's corporate owned, although that's easy to target as someone who may just be watching this, right? I mean, it's easy to understand why a corporate owned STR that is never lived in would be an issue in a residential neighborhood. That's easy to understand. What I think becomes a lot more nebulous is around the idea that, well, to Peter's point, what's the difference between, an individual using a property in the exact same fashion? To the neighbor, it is likely not different. So down the road, I certainly would like to have more discussion about, the definition and how to make sure that, I think different people have different senses of maybe what the issue is really about or the problem.
Yeah, for sure. That's part of why we're here. Okay, so let's go to the next one that we did a survey for, which was the one rental per week limit, right? And I think definitely making sure we explain what we mean here clearly, right? This is that you cannot rent your unit more than one time per week. That doesn't mean the renters have to rent it for a full week, but it means that you can't have 2 days and then another 2 days and then another 2 days renters with lots of turnovers, right? So that's what this one was. So what problem would that solve, right? So what people said, the elimination of repeated fast turnovers strains infrastructure, increases total number of visitors, disruptive to neighborhoods, encourages party atmosphere. People really feel like the 2 to 3 day party rentals are the cause of noise, trash, and other bad behaviors. Again, this would not limit or stop 2 to 3 day rentals, right? But it would stop multiple 2 to 3 day rentals in a week. And then someone here, I guess our language wasn't that clear. And they said they support the minimum 1 week rental period. So that is sort of the other one. So we can come back to that as a different option to examine. Too many people on the island, so it would reduce the number of people or the number of turnovers or number of different groups renting a single property. So overall, it seems to me these are mostly about feeling like too much turnover is more disruptive and it could encourage more bad behavior. Those are the problems that minimizing the number of rentals you could do in a week might solve. Okay, data to support this. People want to know the number of rentals per week or per month with those with the most frequent rentals. So how often is this being done? I mean, I think that's the sort of baseline here is like, how often is our STRs being rented for short periods multiple times in a week, right? I think that's primarily the stuff here. People also ask about just average number of nights per stay. So that is how long overall people are staying. And then people asked about how other communities have managed this. I think that's the gist here. Did I miss anything? Okay. So intended consequences, reducing overall number of visitors to the island, a modest reduction in infrastructure wear and tear. It could reduce the number of party groups looking for short raucous visits, which might help with noise problems and disruption. Might be a modest reduction in traffic from frequent chaotic turnovers. Cuts down on the transient nature of occupation of homes in a neighborhood. Reducing party rentals during the summer, but maybe then this person suggests only having this requirement for the summer and not the shoulder seasons. Those seem to be the main the main things people think that the intended consequences that it would happen. Unintended consequences. Cleaning jobs for cleaning services, modest reduction. Could be some loss of income for people who rent their STRs typically more than once a week. Could negatively impact the shoulder seasons. Minor violations for confusion. So yes, being clear, making sure that it's very clear about the technicalities of like, when does the week start and end? Maybe it would lead some people to stop short-term renting, but that could be good potentially as well. Questions about, again, enforcement and monitoring, and who's going to do that. It could reduce access to families that, you know, are able to afford just because they rent in the middle of the week for shorter periods. This would limit year-round residents who wanted to do shorter or more frequent of these. So yeah, I think that that sort of summarizes our unintended consequences. So again, going to the policy goal ranking, you know, there's a couple of, if we sort of add up the 4s and 5s together, right, that people think it could have a positive impact on preserving neighborhoods. It could have a positive impact on noise. Some additional moderate impacts. So it doesn't look like the thought is that this would have tremendously large impacts, really more on the modest side. So I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll just go to the questions. Enforcement, does this cause a problem? How often is it really used yet? Someone who doesn't support this because they don't want any 2 to 3 day party rentals. Yeah, Likert scale and logistics enforcement, as you said. So that's that. Any questions, comments, conversation about this? What are people's takeaways? Yes, Jim. You're muted, Jim.
Casey, yeah, David is ahead of me. You can't
Oh,
see.
David, sorry, I was only looking at faces again.
It's,
David,
but
go
Jim,
ahead.
go ahead. It's fine. It's fine, buddy. Go.
Okay. So anecdotally, I can say that when we had an STR and we lived in the house next door, short-term rentals of 2 or 3 days, usually for weddings, usually during the shoulder season, were not a problem at all. In fact, it was wonderful to see families come and do that. So it's possible that not having this limitation during the shoulder season might help, although I suspect it might encourage party groups. The main point I want to make on this is how we need to have different policy levers work together. And if they're not working, the horrible results that can come of it. And again, I'll go to this article, you're all going to read it on Austin, Texas. The terrible thing there is it's corporate ownership who's not anywhere near the neighborhood, and it's numerous two-day, maybe 3-day, largely 2-day party groups renting. And it's not only torn neighborhoods apart, but it's caused unbelievable amounts of noise, chaos, drinking, all sorts of things. I mean, you'll see there's even a school bus that's been retrofitted in a horrible way. But I mean, all this sort of thing. What I'm saying is our policy levers need to add up. And if you don't have the limit corporate ownership or limit absent ownership, whatever you want to call it, and if you don't limit these too many of these short-term party rentals, there can be terrible results. And so on the other hand, to look at it more positively, adding up our policy levers in rational ways can really help.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. David.
Yeah, Jim, that is an excellent point. Thank you. That we should create a package and everything should work together at some level. So I think this one, the problem with this one more than the first question is that this one is 100% data driven, and I am almost positive that we are going to have data surrounding this. Are less than 1 week rentals troublesome? I would say they're definitely probably more on the nuisance end troublesome than the full week rentals. But I would also suggest that maybe we should sit down and have a talk with the Chamber of Commerce and ask them what weekends these are that people are renting by the weekend and why they're promoting them. I'm willing to bet that it is more driven by island events than it is by the length of the rental. So, and what I mean by that, wine weekend, Fagawi weekend, those early shoulder season weekends where people do not get rarely are getting full week rentals. It's the first bite of the apple of the season and everyone needs money. So I think that it's a problem, but what is the cause is the question. I don't agree with some of the items on the list, such as pressure on the infrastructure, so on and so forth, because people are going to be here anyway. People are here. I mean, if it's a slow weekend, yeah, we'll get a little bump up on pressure on the infrastructure, but other than that, I think that listen, our infrastructure is used and it's overwhelmed a lot of the times and would be even without STRs. So I just have a problem making that connection, especially with 2 weeks or 2-day or 3-day rentals. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Kathy.
Oh, so I guess on the nuisance side of things, whether they're parties or they're not parties, I think the regulations that we have in place are really there, because that seems to be the biggest complaint that people have, especially in the neighborhoods where there's too much noise. So I'm very disappointed that we don't have the web portal yet to register everybody so that we can find out who are the bad actors and then pull their permits. But I think this one, just speaking as, I don't know, maybe probably the only person on this group here who does short-term rentals, and I actually do. Almost all of mine are 2 and 3 days. I wouldn't have a problem with the, once per week, because I really don't, my son is the one who does all the cleaning and turnovers. He works in other industry. He needs those days to turn the house over anyway. But I think the idea that it encourages parties. I've never had a party, and I think that most of the homes on this island are nice homes, and the people who own them would not want somebody trashing their house. So I find a disconnect there. So I'm really looking forward to the data on that. What we see families that can't afford a full week. We see families who are multi-generational, or we see families who are coming to the island because they grew up here and their family is here and the house isn't big enough for all of them, so they need another place to stay. I see like 3 couples that are young and they're coming out for a weekend on Nantucket. Those are the kinds of people we see. And since I personally vet all of them myself, I don't allow party type things. So I think there's there's an awful lot of assumptions that really people ought to think about. I don't see how that would, I agree with the shoulder seasons and off seasons. There shouldn't be any kind of lever there, because that's not when people come to party. At least I don't hear any parties in February that are causing problems. So I think if we had something like this, it should just be in the middle of the summer. And that makes sense. But I do think we have to see the data about parties, because I think that there are parties for sure. But that's probably the exception to the rule.
Thanks, Kathy. Peter.
Just two things. Number one, Austin's a college town, a very big college town, and probably the nicest town in Texas. So I don't know, the equation of Nantucket to Austin or Nantucket to any other place is very difficult. Number two is we have to be careful when we mention anything specifically. There's one house in town that has recently been brought up as a party house owned by somebody who we've been talking about. And I'll sit down to dinner with somebody, tends to be older people, and all of a sudden that one house has become every property in this portfolio is a party house. And, quite frankly, when we looked at the noise complaints, and we'll get more information of that as we go forward, the amount of noise complaints we have in this town are minimal. So, it's just not the same here as it is, whether it be in Austin or whether it be anywhere else.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Julia.
I guess I would say, that Peter, sometimes you need to talk to the neighbors to actually get a sense of what's going on. So noise complaints don't always tell the picture. I think a lot of people are really concerned about getting the cops involved on an island where the police are stretched in the first place. So I would say that's not usually a good indication of what's really going on. But I wanted to mention something a little bit different, which I think is going to be interesting when we start looking at some data. I was talking to someone in real estate about sort of the difference between, I think this impacts the idea of the length of stay. Okay, so bear with me. The difference between a rental, an STR that might be listed on a platform versus on an online platform like Airbnb or Vrbo versus a realtor held STR. And so NARAB is going to produce some data, and hopefully Granicus is going to have its data, and we're going to, like that data too, and agree that it's valid and whatnot. But on the platforms, as I understand it, is, and I'm sure Kathy, maybe you can confirm, is that that's how you are listed. On the platform, the owner who lists may be charged, let's say, a fee for the transaction, but most of the fees, like the booking fee and the cleaning fees, are passed directly to the guest who is booking the rental. Okay, so this matters because if you're doing a shorter term stay, you don't have to worry as the owner, as the operator, that you're going to have to pay this exorbitant. I mean, we all know how cleaning fees have gone through the roof, right? This exorbitant cleaning fee for, let's say, a 2 or 3 night stay. And so Kathy's shaking her head the wrong way, but this is how I was talking to someone who's quite in the know. And I think this is an experience that they were having on Vrbo, I believe is what they were using. So, and then the flip side is on the realtor held, they're really, everything gets passed through to the owner or of the property, so that, and then there really isn't an incentive to do shorter term. So what I'm boiling this to is I would suspect that the NARAB data would show longer lengths of stays, also because they don't tend to have, part of homes, but all entire homes and entire properties, whereas the platforms may show shorter stays. And that may very well be because some segment of that is also, year-round residents renting part of their home, and, there's no kitchen or there's no, and so I think that there's a difference when you're looking at, I think you have to look at both to understand what you're really trying to address, I guess.
Can I respond to this?
Yeah, can I just say though, I think I want to make sure that I capture the data implications there too. So that Semanish gets this in our notes, that like Julia, that you're saying you think it'll be helpful to make sure that we disentangle some of the information for whether where the rentals are taking place, right? So
But
that,
I guess my point is, if you only looked at, let's say, NARAB data, or you only looked at the platform data, you would not get a full picture.
right.
You
Okay.
have to look at both, because I think they have different structural pieces that affect the behavior.
Got it. Got it. You're not saying you need to know which is which.
No, I'm just saying it's, I think that some of the length of stay may be, affected by,
Yeah.
let's say, the pricing schemes, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Helpful. Thank you. Yeah, Kathy, do you want to just, Karen, if you don't mind, she just jumps in on this same question.
Just to respond, so the cleaning fees are something that the owner can choose to have or not have. It's not at all under the control of Airbnb.
No, my point is, Kathy, that it gets paid passed through directly to the customer,
and so does the price of the rental. So if you are, the cleaning fee is paid for by the owner, regardless. If you are going through a real estate agent, the price that you give the real estate agent that you need includes however much it costs to have your house cleaned, which is the same on the
Sure.
platforms. It's no
But
different, absolutely no different at all.
Well, I'll disagree
Okay.
on this one. It's
Okay, but I've used both, and I am an owner who operates it, so I kind of do know how it works. So I think also, and if anyone's interested, just today, so Nantucket Together had requested data from the platforms, and we knew that we did not want data from individual platforms, and they won't give it to you anyway. So on a routine basis, Airbnb and Vrbo, for example, submit their data, which is all aggregated and depersonalized, to data aggregators. And since they submit it to the data aggregators, they're allowed to ask for it back. So I just got data today that's basically what you're looking for. You could decide you don't believe it. It's the kind of information of just the platforms by themselves that's not aggregated. So I'll send it up to Stacy, and if Stacy wants to send it around, look at it. I looked at it quickly. It came in like 5:30 tonight, and it does show that average. I think the average rentals in the summer are a lot longer. They're about a week on average, and in the off season they're shorter. So there's more of the weekend rentals in the off season. Anyway, I'm happy to send that along.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that. Karen.
I think that I see the rationale for this, and that maybe it could reduce some of these big party situations, but I also think that for the average person renting their home, logistically, I'm just trying to try on like how this works, and maybe this is because we've never used a platform or realtor or anything, we just do everything ourselves, but just like, so logistically we would have to like fill in, we pretty much only rent by the week for the most part. Occasionally at the shoulder seasons we'll have somebody come for the weekend, but I just kind of got into the weeds of like, how is this going to be tracked, under what platform, who's going to be looking at it, and what's going to happen when you see, oh, there's this was an overlap, there were two within too close a time frame. Who defines the week? Is it the town says Saturday to Saturday, and that's what everybody has to go by, or is it by 7 days? Or there just seem to be a lot of logistical things that would make this pretty complicated to manage.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a thought, Judy Barrett, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know you are sitting in, and I wonder if there's anything you want to add just about enforceability and enforceability logistics overall for these kinds of things, and how you see that, how you've seen that play out.
So I actually was hoping to just hide tonight, but I
Okay.
will just say this. I actually do have a meeting scheduled with town council tomorrow, which was part of why I wanted to just listen to this discussion tonight, because there are things coming up that I want to run by him. So I think, let me just park this for now and be able to discuss this with him tomorrow. I can tell you my own town recently had a very difficult situation with an STR and the enforcement of a local bylaw. So this is a topic that's near and dear to me as well. So Let me talk to town council and I'll have Board to report to you when you meet next.
Great.
If that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Judy. Okay, John.
I just wanted to reiterate what I thought Dave Iverson said, which was really key, which is that data is going to really answer a lot of these concerns and a lot of these questions. For example, from my standpoint, like Karen, we use our home, but we also rent it out, but we rent it out in weeks. So this kind of an issue is not that big a deal. But on the other hand, I could see how it could be a big deal. I don't know, Kathy, whether you have numbers of renters throughout the week. I'm not sure whether it makes a whole lot of difference if you have a control over who you rent to. And half our rental people are folks I've known for years and years and years. They're never a problem. They just come back because they want to come back. But the other aspect of this that I think is really important that I'd like to know more about is the tax revenue, is the impact on the community if we were to restrict the number of short-term rentals on a per week basis. And again, as Dave said, we can get the answers to a lot of this stuff, I guess, over the course, which hopefully can help us resolve whether I'm sort of agnostic as to whether this proposition is a good one or a bad one. I could go either way with it, but I'd sure love to know a little more on the data side.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. And I think we heard in the last meeting, right, that our data analysts aren't doing the economic analysis, but the question about tax revenue is something that will come out of the discussion with the finance committee. So, and if we have the data on how many of these are there now, we'll have a sense of how many would be restricted if you put something like this in place. So that would, I think, be something you could find out. Julia?
Just quickly, I guess, you know, I'm with a lot of what I'm hearing right now, which is it's not quite clear whether it would make a big difference in the neighborhoods. I could see how when you look at situations that you read about, whether it's Austin or Nashville or I think I don't think Nantucket wants to be the bachelorette or bachelor party central. I just don't think that's what we're going for. And I don't think a lot of the STRs are necessarily catering to that. But if it wasn't a big deal to folks and if it helped resolve a potential issue, I could see how this might be helpful.
Thanks. Peter?
Just two things. I don't know, we had an assignment or we had decided that we wanted me to work with the finance director on town economics. We talked about it, but we never decided that's where we wanted to go. So if that be the case, that's fine. But I would like to have Julia be on that committee as well, because I don't think it would be fair for myself and the town finance director to be doing it without somebody with another point of view.
I used to work for Brian, so I'm happy to help you here.
That's why I suggested it. Yeah. Number two is it might be an interesting discussion and we can do this as part of we talked to Brian. If we lower the amount of rentals on this island by just 10% a year, what effect that would have on the retail community? And by retail, I'm cutting everything: restaurants, hotels, stores. Let's just say we cut it by 10% and that affected a 5% deduction in business, a reduction in business. It would be a very interesting number. I mean, 5% reduction in business to most stores on this island could be devastating. So I don't know the answer, and I think we'll talk about that with Julia and I when we talk with Brian, but it's something that we really need to consider, aside from taxation and everything else. And Julia, we'll follow up on that together on the meeting with Brian.
Sorry, to be clear, we're not looking at economic impact. We're talking about STR revenue, right? Isn't that what we're talking about?
I think this was economic impact.
Well, there were requests, right? Kathy in particular requested some analysis on economic impacts. I don't know that the group, like we got as far in the last meeting as figuring out exactly what it is that people would like to see. But I think, Peter, you're now putting a very discrete proposal on the table, which is, would it be helpful to do some analyses of percent reduction of STRs? What do we think that effect that would have on the economy overall? And you're, I think, suggesting that you and you and Brian, what is Brian's?
Turbot,
Sorry, what is Brian's title again?
he's the finance director.
Finance director, sorry. So you work with the finance director, and that Julia work with you, and that you together do some of the analysis, both on the tax revenue side from STRs directly, but also on the potential side impacts on businesses, and see if there's some, is that the proposal you're making right now, Peter?
Yes, that would be the proposal. And maybe it's not Julia and me. Maybe it's somebody from finance committee and somebody from somewhere else. I don't know, but it doesn't have to necessarily be Julia and myself, but it was a suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I would only just say, as I've said before, if it is members of this committee working together, it will have to be a public meeting. Whether you want to, whether that's an issue, I don't know. You just have a, Zoom link and people can watch you all sit around a tablet and work together. I think that's, but it would have to be posted and all that sort of stuff.
Just for two?
As long as any more than one person from the committee, that was the legal opinion we got from the town's attorney.
I know others
Good.
have their hand up, and I apologize, but I thought that, Stacy, in prior meetings, you were very clear that an economic impact analysis, if it were done, would likely be done by an outside third party, which might make some sense. But even if it were done, that it would be a, sort of a subjective exercise, and that it likely would not be maybe not that helpful, I guess. And so I feel strange being put in a position where now we would have to analyze not just the package, but also the impact on the economy. I mean, it's just an interesting, if there was if you said, okay, we have a consultant, or we have months to do this, or, but just to guess and to throw spaghetti on the wall, I don't think is necessarily effective.
Yeah. Okay. Point taken. I mean, I think I think what I had said was that if you wanted a third party to try and conduct something like this, and you wanted the town to actually procure some new consultant for that task, right, there would need to be a scope of work, and it would need to go before the select board to approve and to then do the whole procurement. I think what Peter was suggesting is, can we use town staff, like the finance director, and maybe it's, as he said, then not members of this committee, but there's a team of people who already work for the town who people would find sufficiently credible. That said, I was also going on what we heard from Granicus, which was, there's a lot of reasons to take those with like very many grains of salt. Jim.
Okay, 2 points. One, just quickly on the economic ramifications, which I don't fully understand. But I think to start with an assumption, if there were a 10% decrease in STRs, what would be the economic effect? May not be that helpful, because we don't know that our regulations will cause a 10% decrease. So why would we be investigating that? I think what we're trying to do is perhaps maybe we will decrease STR some, but maybe we'll create better quality STRs. And so I want to segue from that to my other point, which is we can discuss about whether limiting or trying to limit some of the 2 to 3 day stays through this regulation, whether it would reduce parties or not. But I think really it goes back to the point that Kathy made, that I made earlier too, which is if the owner is really involved, those 2 or 3 day stays probably won't result in parties. And again, it goes back to a point I tried to make earlier, which is that these levers have to work together. And it probably, in my opinion, is a good idea to try to limit those 2 to 3 day rentals. But even more important is, or just as important, equally as important, is trying to make sure that the owner has a local connection and cares about the community as much as we can. Obviously, we can't do all of that, but we can work in that way, partly through the corporation issue or others. In other words, people's behavior exists at different times for different reasons, and we want our policy levers to work together to try to bring out the best in our renters and the best in our community.
Yeah, thanks. Kathy, oh, sorry, David.
Thank you, Stacy. Just a couple of points I wanted to bring up. First of all, was about economic impacts. We have less STRs. We're going to have less STR income, which will affect the town, since I think STR tax represents a little less than 10% of the town budget. So that is a clear ramification that we don't have to guess at. Less STRs also means less tax and less people around town, so it's going to affect the business. Can we put a number on it? No. Can the professionals? Probably, but how good, really? The second thing is something that Julia said, and I'm not picking on you, Julia. I just want to use it as a point to get somewhere else. When you said, well, we really don't want to be bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, and I think a lot of people might agree with that. But I think a better way to think of this is appropriate activities at appropriate places at appropriate times. So a short-term rental in a lug 2 zoning district with 2 acres of property that can barely see your neighbor, I don't think a bachelor party is going to be an issue. We shouldn't be the island of the downers, right? Like, people enjoy Nantucket. It's a part of people's lives. If they want to have their bachelor party, they should be able to have it, but it should be in an appropriate location that doesn't disturb neighbors. So I think that we need to really take a look at what's appropriate in appropriate places and what's not. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That's a nice statement there. Appropriate activities in appropriate places and appropriate times. See how people like that one. Kathy.
Okay, just quickly on the economic impact. I mean, it's real, obviously the town revenue is a part of it, and the town revenue which goes away means it has to come from somewhere else, or people lose their jobs in the town. So there's lots of impacts that happen around that. And I think that there was an impact study, economic impact study done 2 years ago by the UMass Amherst Donahue Institute. And that already has a model for whatever it used to figure out what the impacts would be if, and I think you can do it 10% less, 15% less, and come out with impacts to the businesses and the tourist industry and so forth. So I think that can be refreshed. I heard a rumor that that is going to be refreshed with new numbers, with whatever comes out of the NAREB data, to see what that looks like. I don't know if that's true, but I think there may be an economic impact analysis available to us for whatever it's worth in the time frame that we need it.
Kathy, is that being done? Is that part of the scope of work for the NAREB data person?
I don't know. I don't know what their scope of work is, but I think that they want their data to feed into something like that. So that's all I know.
Separate NAREB, but it would be a NAREB.
It might be the town, Stacy.
It might be the town?
It might be. I'm not clear, but I think it might be.
But the last one was paid for by Copley.
Right. And it was paid for by Copley, but the question is it, if you look at the rationale, is it a valid rationale they used? I don't know. Maybe it isn't. But
Well, I think when the client, if it were Act Now for, you would say the other.
I'm not saying anything. It's data. And I don't know who's going to pay for this one. All I heard was that there's going to be a new one out there done by them, by UMass Amherst. And I think they're a fairly respected organization. So I don't know if it's any good. I'm just throwing it out there that I heard that we will have something if we want to use it. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. And Kathy, maybe you and I can chat later if you have more information in ways I can be helpful. Because I think if there is one being done, it'd be great if we could find a way to make it more credible to the group. You know, because then it would have more value for this group. So, John?
I just want to, I guess, second Peter's comments that we really do need to look at economic impact. As some of you know, I spent 14 years as chief of staff to a congressman in the US House. And I'm hard pressed to think of an issue where we didn't ask ourselves, what is the economic impact of anything that we were considering on the people that it affects? And I think it would be, frankly, a dereliction of our responsibility as a committee, as a working group of government, not to at least examine what that economic impact is, even if we can't quantify it, even if we can't really hone in on exactly what it is. I certainly think it's a very important consideration with respect to those who live on the island, whether seasonal or year round. And so I just think that Peter's suggestion, how you go about doing this, how we go about doing this, may be a bit of an issue. But the fact is that before casting any kind of vote or reaching a consensus on any of these propositions that are in front of us, we really do need to think about at least how does it impact the economy of the island and, more importantly, the jobs of folks who live on Nantucket. Just my thoughts.
Thanks, John. Peter?
I wholeheartedly agree with John and Peter on this. I must say, I assume that at some point in this process, either we or someone, the town, was going to undertake such an activity. You know, you've got to look at this in a whole, in a whole wholesome attitude here. You can't take bits and pieces and then say, well, you know, we come to a conclusion. The value of the conclusion is the thoroughness of the analysis. And clearly, most of us who deal with these with any kind of policy issue are looking at the economic factor as a big part of it. So I think we should get some clarification, I don't know from whom, as to whether the town is prepared to do this. I'm less concerned, but obviously I can understand where Julie is coming from. But I would rely on the town. I don't see any reason why we can't rely on the town's economic, financial people. But we ought to have that information.
Thanks, Peter. Karen?
I agree. I just can't imagine how we can think of these without at least giving some thought to what the economic impacts could be, in a variety of ways. But my other comment was to follow up on what David said about what's appropriate in appropriate places at appropriate times. I'm wondering, that seems like a great framework for addressing a lot of the problems that people seem to have concerns about. So what's the best way to get there? Is it by limiting 2 to 3 night stays, or is it about something more direct about, not allowing parties in certain density places, or allowing them in, I don't know, like, what's the best way to get at that? Is it one of these levers? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we could sort of add that as a thing that we're evaluating. How well do these ideas help get us there? But yeah, I mean, I think it's a piece of the puzzle to consider, right? How well does your policy help get the right activities in the right places in the right times? Julia.
Thanks, Stacey. I just wanted to be clear. I believe in data and studies and all this good stuff. It was just a little bit of a wild card to hear that we were going from, we're going to evaluate STR tax revenue, which is a pretty straightforward process, I think, to we're going to do an economic impact study. And if that's what the group wants, I totally agree with what Karen said, which is anything we consider has to, we have to consider that. But if we want a full-blown economic impact study, that's a lot more involved, and we should probably discuss that. To your point, because it probably needs to be procured.
So let me propose this. Let me circle back with the town on what they think they could realistically do as a town. And I'll circle back to see if somebody's actually hiring UMass to, come and do this. Who's hiring them and what's the scope? And how do we make sure that it's as credible and salient and legitimate for this group as possible? So let me do some behind the scenes follow up here and see what I can bring back to you all on this issue. Okay, so I think I'm thinking again about our work plan, and is sort of the next item on our to-do list. But one thought I have was, I think we could continue to do these deep dives on an idea or two at a time. Maybe at least just one idea at a time, as we're moving forward over the next couple of meetings through, even if we are looking at initial tranches of data or meeting the data analyst or whatever, we may still be able to fit this in, because it does seem really useful. And the more we can get through some of these before we get into our in-person all day thing, I think, it's just more food for thought. So why don't I see if I can add that to our agenda for a month from now, I guess, is our next meeting. The other question, though, is the panel presentation. So Samanish and I are going to work to see if we can get a panel together for that meeting as well, to just give us some examples of how these policies, what they're doing and how it's working where they are. John?
Stacy, do you have some idea of what let's call them policy development framework issues in mind? Because I can think of a bunch.
Well, I was going to go through the ones that we, did rise to the top from our December meeting. And I don't have those in front of me right now. But I can, let me actually pull up. I think.
Well,
we
perhaps
had a conversation about caps, I think.
May I make a suggestion? Perhaps you could pull out the top 4 or 5 and send them around to everybody, and we could respond back with what we think the next 2 that we might discuss at the next meeting would be, or something. That's a thought, rather than you just unilaterally pick.
Yeah. Okay, I could do that. We could do that. Send a little survey of which one do people want to take next.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about our timeline. I don't know. Let's see. I'm checking my email because I had asked the town if they were able to send me their, but they weren't. Okay. All right, so here's what I got from Brooke and Brian Turbot, who are working on trying to get the scope of work and procurement out for the town's data analyst. They had told me they were going to try and get a draft scope of work done by today. I don't know if that happened and it didn't get to me, or it didn't quite get done by today. But they were then hoping to basically get out invitations to bid by Friday. And they need a 2-week response window. So that takes us to March 5th. March 5th? No, March 3rd. So that takes us to March 3rd by the time they would get their bids, right? And then they said they're not entirely sure exactly how quickly it will take them to review responses and select a vendor. And then they have to get the contract executed and approved by the select board. Right? So we, in our draft schedule, we're trying to aim for having this data person on board by early March. And already, like, that's clearly not going to happen. Now, the additional piece was to have a subgroup meeting where committee members, you all, can come and look at the draft scope of work prior to them sending it out for a bid, because that would require hosting for a public meeting 48 hours in advance. And, having that meeting, the town gave me their estimate that they think that would push the schedule back, something like a week. The alternative that they proposed was that as soon as the draft scope of work is complete, that we send it to all of you. You send your comments and suggestions for how to get it changed to me, and I send those directly to the town, and they make whatever changes they can or will, and then they get it out. So those are the proposals and on the table, right? The question is, do we want to does it seem worth pushing the timeline back in order for this group to have a meeting to discuss the draft scope of work, or should the group members be invited to just send your comments on how to improve that draft scope of work, or any concerns or questions you have about it? The town responds to those and just gets the scope out. Jim.
I would go with have them send it around and we send comments and not lose a week.
Thanks. Others. David.
Agree with Jim.
Fine by me.
Agree. I agree.
Agree with Jim.
I think we're all nodding.
Okay. Kathy, I know this was something you were particularly wanting input on, so let me turn to you.
Yeah, I'm just extremely disappointed, but not surprised. And I really wanted, I thought it would be good to have the group involved during the writing of the statement of work rather than critiquing it afterward, just to save some time. So this just adds on to it. I don't think we have any choice to do that. I'm here on the island. I was ready to go. So I'm very disappointed, because that is my background. That is what I did for 40 years. Statement of work, procurements, public sector, data analysis. So I guess I'm not surprised that this was going to happen, but it's our involvement, the subgroup after the statement of work is written and it's sent out for a bid, and then we wait the 2 weeks and it comes back. Will we have any involvement in the evaluation of that? Because that will be, I think, really important too, to evaluate the bids. If we can be part of that and make sure that's scheduled 2 days in advance to public meeting, just if we could do that, that would be good.
Okay, that's something I need to take back to the town to ask about how that works, having members of the public involved.
Yeah, and my concern is nothing that Brooke, and bless her heart, going out and doing this and taking it upon herself. This is not her job, and Malcolm raising his hand to do this, but that's not that subject matter expertise is not there. That's not what they
Yeah,
did
I
for
do
a
believe
living.
that Brooke
So-
mentioned, I'm trying to find the email now, that it actually is Malcolm's professional expertise. But let me see if I can find how she said that.
He's a doctor, isn't he? An MD?
Yeah, yeah, he's a doctor.
But data integration, data analysis, and all the potholes that you step in if you don't do it right or choose the right, vendor is, it's hard to do it. It's hard to do any kind of procurement if you don't have somebody that's got that kind of expertise, and it doesn't have to be me.
And
but-
maybe she said it was Brian. I'm having trouble finding the, oh yeah, here she said, oh, it says that Malcolm is a data scientist.
He's a scientist, but not a data scientist.
That's what, that's. what-
Anyway, I'm just
Quoting
throwing
Brian.
that out there. It's just,
I hear you. I hear you.
I've just seen it fail too many times, and I would hate for us to be disappointed that we didn't get what we asked for.
Yeah.
I think if Brian is going to be in charge of it, it'll get done correctly. Brian is really good.
Okay,
Joe, would you agree with me on that? Grouse? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So I think where that leaves us is that our next meeting, as soon as the town has their draft scope of work complete, we will send it around to all of the group members. We will ask you to try to turn around any comments on it as soon as you can. And to send them back to us, but you can copy Brooke directly. And then Brooke and Brian will finalize it and try to get it out, hopefully by the end of this week. I think that's still, I haven't heard different, but that's the goal. I think then when we hold our next meeting on the 14th of March, I would certainly expect that at the very least they have someone under contract. I would hope that that person will have had some time to meet with the NARAB expert and with Granicus to at least be able to, understand the lay of the land. But at the very least to be able to come to our meeting next month and give you all a chance to talk to them directly, right? About the scope of work that's in the procurement is important, but it's also, once they're on board, you'll have a chance to be talking to them. So I think that will be helpful. And then we will also try to have a panel we'll try to see who we can find from some of these other communities that you all have recommended, to see if they can come and attend our meeting and talk about what's working and what's not in their own communities. And actually, I think we do have a little bit of time. We could actually brainstorm a bit, like what are the key questions you want to ask those panelists. I know, some of you might have put that in your survey results, but we can sort of talk through that a little bit. And then we could also do another deep dive on one of these potential policy levers that rose to the top in our December meeting. So that's my thoughts about what our plan would be for the 14th. Kathy?
Just a suggestion along those lines, since there are so many communities out there that are having, STR issues, and they're all different. Should we, when we're putting together our panel, have almost not like a little evaluation criteria that we have that says, we want communities that are like this or something like that, so that we just don't pick random ones. We have ones that we think might be applicable to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be really helpful if you're suggesting another community that there's some elements about what that community is doing that are particularly, you think, relevant for Nantucket. So you should let us know what those are, right? So for example, if we're going to talk to Palm Springs, we're going to ask, you're going to highlight, these are the 3 things they're doing or the 5 things they're doing that I think are promising, and here's some things we'd like to know about them.
I'm thinking more along lines of their match to the kind of situation Nantucket's in. In other words, how like they are to Nantucket. Because some of those levers might be perfect for the community. I think there are a lot of community specific ones. And so something that works in New Orleans may be a terrible idea for us. So I think we should narrow it down to ones that are more like Nantucket is. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Karen?
Just a quick question. So if we're going to do the policy dive, would you be sending out the measure ahead of time and then we would be talking about it?
Indeed. Jim?
I agree with you and Kathy that we want to look at communities that have some issues that are similar to ours and how do their policy levers affect them. But I don't think it's wrong to look at communities that are not exact matches for Nantucket. It would be very hard to find a community that's an exact match. And I think there's a certain level of 3-dimensional thinking where if you look at a different problem in a different situation, you can then extrapolate around behind it and back to your situation. If you see a couple different ones, I don't think we want to have linear 2-dimensional thinking. They're like us, so they do this. We have to learn how these policy levers work in different ways at different times, and then we can extrapolate it back. That's true education. So that's what I would say. Yes, look for some similarities, but let's not try to get places that are just like us.
Yeah, thanks. Julia?
To that point, I agree with Jim, and I think what I find helpful is when you're talking to a community that's further along, meaning, like the Hawaiian Islands always come up. I think they come up as like a group of islands that have been sort of regulating or dealing with short-term rentals since like 2008 or something like that in some cases. And that's helpful because there's longevity and they've sort of evolved in their thinking. And I think they can teach us a lot. I think it's harder when, we put something in place last year, right? So we're not really sure. So it would be really nice if the communities we selected had a little more historic perspective.
Yeah, thanks. David?
Yeah, Jim kind of stole my thunder. Not that it was thunder, it was rumblings. But I think that it would be nearly impossible to find an identical situation to ours as far as comparing hotel infrastructure, adjacent towns with hotel infrastructure, and things like that could skew it. But I do believe that there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from other communities as far as implementation and enforcement, and what's worked and what hasn't. And so I don't think we should limit it. We should get as many people as we can get, and we should have some good questions for them. But I think that we need to, again, the appropriate question to the appropriate town, right? Like if they're way different from us, then we should try to glean some wisdom on implementation and policy levels. Thanks.
Thanks. Peter?
I don't disagree with anything anybody has said, but I would underscore what Kathy has said, which is, look, there are only so many people we can have on this panel to make it time effective. And I would start by trying to find, we're not going to find anything that's identical, obviously. And I would start with trying to find those that are most similar. And we're going to have to be, obviously, even among that group, there will be areas where we will be able to ask questions about that are going to be different from ours, but we'll get a historical perspective. But if we've got 5 slots or at most on a panel, I would do our best to try to find those 5 that are closest. By definition, it'll be a diverse group, period, to begin with. because nothing is like us.
And as Semenis just put in the chat, right, so far we've gotten 3 responses from people with suggestions. Some not that specific. I don't know if Hudson Valley, if we have exactly which community and where we need to know who are the officials we could be reaching out to. So Massachusetts, Cape and Islands, you need to be more specific. Whoever suggests that.
Yeah, I would think Granick, I mean, I must say, this is one area where Granick is actually could be, might be helpful, because I suspect that they have a lot of data, and they can at least give us, maybe they can give us a list of, towns or areas, and then we can pick and choose among ourselves.
Yeah. Jeff was on. Did he sign off?
I think so.
We can ask Jeff. He did present 3 examples in his initial presentation to us. And so we could pull that up as well, just to name what those were. I don't know if anyone remembers offhand, but look here.
I think the value will be to put a list together, and then, a comprehensive list, and as a first cut, and then let us as a group come up with those we think are appropriate that would work for the best 5. We can just send around a poll, and you can figure that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. And, to be honest, it's also partly who are we going to get to come and to our meeting?
I assume you mean I assume it's going to be virtual, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, come just show up and
No.
on a panel here. So,
Depends how much we pay them.
yeah, which is nothing, I believe. Tom?
Yeah, Peter Kahn just pretty much said what I was going to say, but I think that we may get the most value from folks around elected officials, et cetera, who are dealing with these issues that are in the Commonwealth, and specifically the Cape and Islands. Like, my suggestion was somebody from the Cape and Islands specifically. And also that, like, we were talking about Austin and New Orleans before, and I think we just, not that we wouldn't, but we want to be mindful of federalism issues, and that different state laws and local jurisdictions are going to be different in other places, and that Massachusetts would be fairly uniform in looking at other communities that are grappling with similar issues.
So Tom, just because I have you and you said you would like to look at Cape and Islands, like, who is there a community that has, the idea that people had here was, let's talk to a community that has regulated STRs and can share the lessons learned. What did they do? What have they learned? What have the impacts been? Who in the Cape and Islands, like, which community would you recommend going to?
Exactly which community, I'm not sure, but I know I know, for instance, the person who I recommended, who's an elected official, knows quite a bit about it. And for instance, he could report on that. I'm happy to do some research on that and recommend somebody and get back to you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep.
And not trying to put you on the spot there. I was just trying to make sure I know who to reach out to. But you did give me a person to reach out to, so that's all I need. Okay. David.
Yeah, just real quick. I think Yarmouth would be good to reach out to. I think they've been at this for a little while. I don't know if Julia agrees with that or not, but I also think that a certain level of maturity in this issue is important for whoever we get. We don't, like, the Vineyard's just starting down this path. So having them come to us, I'm not sure would be productive. We need someone that has some levers installed, has had some experience in how they've worked, and some experience in how enforcement is. So I just think that a certain level of maturity in this issue, it will be helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Julia.
I agree with Dave, and I think if you're looking at the Commonwealth, unfortunately, the Cape and the Islands is not where you're going to find a lot of longevity in terms of policy in STRs. I think if you're looking for longer standing policies, you have to go towards not necessarily resort towns, but towards Boston and the, the greater Boston, like even the Brooklines and the Cambridges and so you're in Boston. And so you're not necessarily going to be comparing like apples to apples, but you may be learning things like enforcement, and you may be learning about specific items that are, in Boston, for example, they outlawed non-owner occupied. Okay, well, that's not likely to be a policy that Nantucket would adopt. But there may very well be some interesting pieces in there. And maybe it's a decision by the group to include at least one, Massachusetts community that has a lot of experience with it, and that, kind of to Tom's point, could really teach us some things that we're going to deal with. Because I agree, like when you go to Colorado, the way they can tax, they can charge up the wazoo in terms of all sorts of things. We just can't, we don't have all of the tools they have. We have different tools. And so I agree that you do need a Massachusetts, hopefully, town, and maybe Brookline is a good one because it's a town and not a city. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Julia. Okay. All right. So let me see if I can name our action items here. We're going to try and get out to you as soon as possible. Here's the policy levers that we identified in the December meeting. Which one do you want to talk about next? Survey. And then once we have that, we will revise the policy development framework questions in the form as suggested, and send that out to all of you as a survey, so that we can then try to synthesize what we get and bring that up for discussion. As soon as we get the scope of work for the town's data person, we will get that out to you. You all can give us your comments, send them directly back to the town. The town will try and move that out as quickly as possible. I will follow up with the town and others on the options available to us for some economic impact information, to try and maximize its value to the group, so that it's as credible and legitimate and salient as possible. You all can go back to this form about the panel, share any additional thoughts with us before the end of the week. And then Semanish and I will get to work next week trying to pull a panel together of some folks who can come to our next meeting. What did I miss?
When is the next meeting?
The next meeting is a month from now, because 2
Is there a
weeks from
date?
now is school vacation and the town does not hold meetings during school vacation.
So what specific date are we talking about?
It's the 14th of March. So today is the 14th of February. Our next meeting is the 14th of March. We're going to stick with the 6 to 9 p.m. timeline. Anything I missed? Semanish, anything I missed?
No,
Stacy, I'm so sorry. Do we stick to the 6 to 9 until or is that like a permanent change? Or I think that was to accommodate the finance committee, which will end its process at one point for a town meeting. Do we want to go back to 5 to 8, or is that, I don't have an opinion. I just know that was to accommodate FinCom.
Peter?
The next one we do overlap. The one after that will probably be okay.
Okay, great. So we can move back to 5 to 8 for the March 28th.
No, the 28th is, oh yes, 28th would be fine. Yes, it looks like it at this point.
Great. Okay, so we'll move back to our 5 to 8 time then. Excellent. Okay, well, I think with that, I would like to invite some public comment, and maybe we even end before 9.
Yeah.
So let me first see, do we have any of our alternates who want to make any comments? Feel free to raise your hand. And then I will go over here to our attendees, and Michael Fox, you can introduce yourself and address the group. You have to unmute yourself.
I just invited you to unmute, so you should have a notification on your computer. If you click that button, you'll be all set.
Well, maybe technical difficulties. All right, well, let us know, Michael, if you manage to do that. Let's go to Jeffrey.
Hi, this is Jeff. Can you hear me?
We can. Hi.
Oh, great. Wow. I mean, I was fascinated. I was on the call for almost the whole time. I'm not Yale, but I'm MIT 81. So anyways, I've been coming to the island since the 70s, probably spent 10 years of my life, but I'm not a year rounder, but I consider myself a Nantucketer because I've spent so much time on the island. First thing I was amazed by the real positive decorum of this group. And I could obviously see some differences of opinions, but no, I think it's very well run. And, the main I mean, I have several comments, but I don't want to, it's getting late, so I don't want to take so much of your time. But I'm a sconsitor, and we have a handful of short-term rentals per year, and I need that just to be able to pay my expenses of my house. So I'm not the corporate guy. I'm the small-term guy. I think I know John Delano. I think I own a house in Tom Nivers next to his, and I just caution the group to look out for the little guys. So much of our short-term rental people. I know all of my neighbors in Wisconsin, and we're old-time families, and we're just trying to pay some of our bills. We protect our houses like crazy because, again, it's our 401k, as someone mentioned, and those houses, we protect them like crazy, and we do everything possible to address any issues, not only with the infrastructure of our house, but with noises. We have responsible caretakers, and I just encourage the group to remember, don't squash the little guy here. And I think we have the same concerns that most of you have with some of the maybe people that might be abusing short-term rentals and taking advantage of the system to make a lot of money. And I share those concerns wholeheartedly, but please protect the little guy like me. And I think that's my comment. And I can put that in email to you if you wish.
No need. We got it. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Great. Michael, we'll try you again. Are you able to unmute? And do any of our other attendees, would they like to make a comment? All right, hearing none. I did want to name one other to-do item. I realized I am going to follow up with Judy about enforcement questions, enforcement logistics, and how much we can rely on the town to help us think through that, et cetera. So with that, I think maybe we can call it a night. Thank you all for your, I agree with Jeffrey. Really, really nice to see the level of decorum and like ability to disagree, but not be disagreeable. So I really appreciate that. And I think it speaks volumes about your commitment to doing the right thing and for your community. So thank you all for that. And we will all keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch with you all before long.
Okay.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.